Very well, sir. Welcome,
Well,
David Curtis, to the Basis Project, and I'm very pleased to meet you this afternoon. A nice sunny afternoon here in Oxford. You're in Oxford, and I'm in Devizes, in just up the road.
I'm in Colchester.
Colchester. Sorry, right.
Yeah.
You were educated in. You have. Before we go over your bio, you have done an interview with Kerry Cassidy on Project Camelot. Do
Right.
you want to go over roughly what was covered in that so that the viewer can refer back to that rather than repeat?
Yes. Well, the banner of the Project Camelot interview is the cover of my first book, The Luminary is Coming: A Vision of Rebirth. And I gave a kind of monologue of my life story. And I was born in Salford in Greater Manchester, and in 1945, just at the end of the war, and the family moved to Oxford when I was two. About 4 years old, I probably had a form of abduction, although I have no memory of the abduction. But I was lying in bed, and I saw some flickering lights near the ceiling, and I was quite fascinated, mesmerized, and I felt my body expanding into the room, and it seemed to get bigger and bigger, and I got afraid, and I put my head under the pillow, and I saw these entities walking over the pillow. I don't know what those entities were, and I don't have any memory of an abduction, but it seems possible that that was an abduction of some kind. That was at the age of about 4. The age of 15, my mother left home, my brother left home, and my father decided to ship me off to America. So I moved to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to join my sister, and we lived in the housing project of Pease Air Force Base. And my brother-in-law was in the Air Force. He came out of the Air Force, and I went to Portsmouth High School, and he got me a job in the Officers Club in Portsmouth in the autumn of 1961. I had no knowledge of UFOs or anything like that whatsoever. But at that very time, in the fall of 1961, at the Pease Air Force Base, Betty and Barney Hill were being investigated for their abduction in the White Mountains, New Hampshire. And that became the biggest abduction case, I think, in UFO history, really. And John Fowler documented that abduction in the Interrupted Journey, and it came out around 1965-67. And what's interesting is that in later on towards Christmas, my brother-in-law took me in the car through the White Mountains, which was the only road through New Hampshire up to Colebrook near Canada. And that was the very site where they had the abduction. So again, that's a kind of link to the UFO phenomenon.
But that's a very heavy link.
Yeah,
It's way above coincidence. It would appear that they knew something and wanted you to be there or remind you of something.
Well, I'll explain something, Miles, that when my sister, in about 1959, she would have been about 20, well, she met this American, and he was at Upper Hayford, the American base near Oxford in Upper Hayford. And they moved off to America. And when I moved over to America at 15, within 3 months, they abandoned me, so that I was abandoned by the whole family, more or less. They all walked out on me. And I had to literally look after myself at 15 years of age. and actually ask people if I can live with them. My point is, I think the whole thing was arranged. Not that my brother-in-law was necessarily conscious of it, but I believe the whole scenario of my brother-in-law coming into our life and then abandoning me in Portsmouth and then taking my sister to California and then abandoning her in California, so he was free of the whole process. And I think there's something behind that.
But how can anybody... how can anybody abandon somebody? Is there this legal redress that people were... or in those days, did you have the ability to have legal redress? You just got away with it?
Yeah, well, I don't know, but, there was no conscience. My sister, brother-in-law had no conscience about dumping me off. And I eventually, what happened was I eventually met up with his family and they took me to New York. So I ended up living 50 miles north of New York in a place called Poughkeepsie on the Hudson River. And from there, something quite interesting happened there. I got involved with the family, and the man was an inventor for IBM. He was a consultant inventor for IBM, the computer company, and he got me a job in the summer before I went to university at Stony Brook, Long Island. He got me a job working on the Apollo rocket.
Now hold on here. I know, Peter Paget knows, and other people know that computer technology is alien derived. It's been steered for us to have it, and it's got a consciousness connection. So you're dropping little hints here, like mini hydrogen bombs.
Yeah.
So let's go into that. There's something very deep going into there. So tell us about it. Apart from the fact you survived suddenly with being dumped at 15, and continue.
Right, so it was a simple job, Miles. It was simply that during the summer of 1964, I worked in a white room, a dust-free room, and I was really looking down microscopes and soldering little modules, little chips that would operate for the Apollo rocket. That was really basically it. I don't remember any other incident going on.
You're talking LSI, large-scale interaction, or you're talking actual DTL logic chips?
I imagine they were chips for the computers, the IBM and whatever. I don't really know. I wasn't technical, and I didn't really.
Well, I think in those days, I'm an engineer. In those days, DTL, diode transistor logic, is that anything like that? Does that mean anything to you?
No, it doesn't. No.
Okay.
Right. So that was a white room. Now I will tell you what I think is a screen memory going back to Portsmouth Peace Air Force Base. So
I'm going to interrupt you again. White room.
Yeah.
We've had a number of abductees and contactees involving a white room.
I know you.
Yeah. So what happened in the white room? What training was involved there?
No, there was no train. It was simply the white room where I did the module stuff and down the microscopes. And I wore a white coat. But what I'm saying is that I learned about screen memories from reading my first UFO book in 1988. So in 1988, I read my first book on UFOs when I was living in Soho, London. I was living in Soho. I was living in the flat above Tin Pan Alley recording studios, and that flat was the flat of the Sex Pistols, the punk group Sex Pistols. Now, the point is, Miles, I'm going to bring in another rock. This is rock music. You'll be interested. This is rock music, and there's a definite link in my life with meeting famous people in the rock business. and I have nothing to do with music. So there, I'm living in the flat that was lived in by the most famous punk group, the Sex Pistols. And I read Whitley Strieber's book, and next door to the flat, next door to the building, was Forbidden Planet. Have you heard of Forbidden Planet?
Yeah, and the Forbidden Planet book as such, the Forbidden Planet itself is the great movie, which basically broke the whole mold of films at the time, 1951. Is that right?
Really?
Yeah, Robbie the Robot, all that.
Well, Forbidden Planet was the bookshop, and that's the famous comic book shop.
Yeah, I used to go there.
Oh, right. Well, in the window, that was Denmark Street. In the window was Whitley Strieber's Communion with the typical alien with the black oval eyes. Everywhere in London at that time, you saw billboards with that face.
Yeah, they were definitely using that for some kind of psychological programming.
It was everywhere. It was everywhere. So I learned about screen memories. And so this memory, which I think is a screen memory, goes back to Pease Air Force Base in Portsmouth. Now, the memory is I enter a room and it's pure white. Everything is pure white. And to my right is a figure. I'm at nearly 6 feet, so it's about 6 feet tall, a figure. I don't see its face, but it's wearing a golden yellow robe. It's wearing a golden yellow robe, and I'm told that it's an undertaker. So I'm told it's an undertaker in a pure white room. I have no memory ever of that happening in Portsmouth. So that's the screen memory of the white room. But so what I want to do is now connect this. I'm going to go forward quite a way till 1970, when I come back from America. I drop out of college. I come back to from America to Banbury near Oxford, Banbury. And I go to art school for a while. And I get a grant. I drop out of art school and I decide to go to India. So I read a couple of interesting books, Uspensky's In Search of the Miraculous and Lama Govinda's Foundations of Tibetan Buddhism. And I go to the Banbury Cross, which is quite famous in a nursery rhyme, the Banbury Cross, which is, there is a fair lady upon a white horse with rings on her fingers and bells on her toes, who carries music wherever she goes. So I'm standing at the Banbury Cross, and I get picked up in a car by this man with a long beard. He's got a long beard, a long hair, and I'm only 25. I'm just 25, and he's about 60. And he starts talking. He says, we're passed through Oxford, and one day I want to go back to Oxford to be buried there. And of course, I'm from Oxford. So he said to me, when we're going towards Oxford and London, he said, would you like to stay the night with me, in the house with me? And I said, yeah, sure. I'm on my way to India. I'm hitching a ride. So we come to Surrey. We come to Richmond, Surrey, and the beautiful Downs. And we drive into this estate, and there's this big Spanish villa, beautiful Spanish villa, with all this ornate gardens and mazes and gardens, beautiful place. We go in there, and we take this Great Dane for a walk up the hill. And later on, he says to me, would you like to meet the owner of the house? And I said, yeah, sure. So this owner of the house comes out, a young man about my age, and we shake hands, and it turns out to be Eric Clapton.
Wow.
Eric Clapton, the most famous guitarist at the time, he was in a group called Cream. And if you go to the album Cream, the very first track, the famous track of Cream is The White Room. Is The White Room.
Now that is very, very, very heavy, and of course Eric Clapton was in the Bangladesh concerts and stuff with George Harrison. Very heavy connection with the Eastern mysticism.
Right. Okay.
Or is there something else involved there?
Oh, I don't know, Miles. But I was on my way to India, and you got the IBM White Room. You've got the Screen Memory in Portsmouth to do with military. The White Room, the Screen Memory, and now we have this connection with the White Room in Eric Clapton, the Cream, the first track. So,
what are you saying?
Well, I don't like to, anyway. The point is, Miles, I know my life works on many levels, and I've never felt in control of my life. I've never felt in control of my life. I feel at some age it was, not only going to Portsmouth at 15, but I've not had much autonomy in my life at all. I don't feel I've had much autonomy. And not only that, Miles, but I think as a child, being the youngest child in a family of 4, I was never part of the family group. Psychologically, I was never part of the family group. And I don't feel I developed what you might call an ego identity, a strong identity. So I feel my identity, it might have to do with the abduction, I don't know.
Okay, right. You've mentioned this a number of times. Are you actually a physical member of that family, or were you placed there?
Yeah.
Along with your sister?
It's quite possible. I have a brother and sister. They're all dead now. All my family is dead. But, when I had the Kerry Cassidy interview, we didn't go into any of this, but I know that you really go into all of this, and I really want to know the truth.
Well, and Sarah Stanger talked about the White Room.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah,
this White Room is important. It's where she was trained. It's where part of the programming happened. There was something, observational. There was an observational part in that White Room which she could see. She could see behind, and she could see, and that was part of the tests. But you keep referring to this White Room, and you also keep referring to the fact that you are different from the family and the White Room, and you're dropping some heavy-duty names in the music business. So exactly. I want to know about that as well, because we know about the music business being for programming.
So I'm living in Poughkeepsie. I graduate from high school in '64, work in IBM on the Apollo rocket in the summer, go to Stony Brook University for 3 years, study comparative religion and philosophy. I decide...
Sorry, I'm going to stop you there again.
Yeah.
You've mentioned the Apollo rocket. What part of the Apollo rocket were you involved with? Now, you must have had some idea of what those things were.
No, honestly, I didn't, Miles. I didn't know. But as I say, the man I lived with, he was a computer expert. He was a consultant inventor. He had lots of patents out. Now, when I lived with them...
No, I can't... Look, there's something wrong here.
Really?
Why are you talking about the Apollo rocket? We know the Apollo rocket just did high orbit stuff, right? But why are you talking about the Apollo rocket and Eric Clapton, and that de facto brings in the Beatles, and also Eastern mysticism, which has got a big alien content in it as well? You're dancing around your handbag on this.
Right. Now, you know the term Satori?
I'm not that familiar, but in case there are others who aren't, explain.
Well, Satori means enlightenment in Zen Buddhism, Satori, right? In Tibetan Buddhism, which I'm a specialist in Tibetan Buddhism, and I met the Lama who actually wrote the foreword for the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which Leary and lots of other people have referred to, Ram Dass and all of that. And I've entered Satori Samadhi when I was in Poughkeepsie at the age of 23. So I'm in Poughkeepsie at the age of 23. I enter a state of Satori Samadhi. Now, in Tibetan Buddhism, that is the state, what they call the clear light of the one mind. It's the diamond body. So you could refer to that as a kind of white room. You could refer to that as a room that's empty, that has no content. And when you enter Samadhi, you're free of the matrix, you're free of Maya, you're free of consciousness, you're free of conditioning. And nobody knows, as far as I know, there's not a single book on this earth that tells you what happens when the Buddha went into Samadhi, when he really went transcendentally into Samadhi, into the diamond body. Nobody knows what happens there. And I think that's connected. Yes.
What do you call the diamond body? What would you refer to that?
The diamond. Most people that experience Satori experience it in this world, in this world, in your body, in this world. And I refer to that as the immanent, it's incarnate, embodied. But there's a discarnate, transcendental Samadhi, which the Buddha is supposed to go into. And when he went into it, and people said, well, what happened? What, his family, his friends, what happened? And he says, I'm not going to say anything. I have nothing to say on metaphysics. And the Taoist Lao Tzu said, those who tell do not know. Those who know do not tell.
Yes, so indeed.
There's something going on to the human race. There's something going on where we don't have access to the source, to something that's going on behind Maya, behind the veil of illusion. And I feel that the UFO phenomenon is very much centered on that level of intelligence. I think the intelligence behind the UFO phenomenon, for example, I think the UFO phenomenon, I think the intelligences may not be synonymous with entities. When we talk about entities, like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, you have human entities, humanoid, you have animal entities, but they're not the real intelligence. They're only symbols. They're only projections in consciousness. The actual intelligence, Miles, we call it the one. In ancient Egypt, it was Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great Thoth. He was the one. Buddha is the one. Buddha's in the one mind. So there's the concept of the one, the Platonic one. And that one is nothing, naught. It's zero. That means it's the white room, it's emptiness, shunyata. So I feel that the intelligence behind the whole phenomenon, I think it is human. I think it is human-like. I think it looks human. But I'm very skeptical about all the entities. I'm very skeptical about, I think they might be just simply being used, they're being used by this intelligence.
Are you aware of an area near the pyramids, under the pyramids, which is like some kind of matrix generator? Something which we all are essentially belong to, and then it projects us into this sort of reality that we think we're in.
I'm not really aware of that as such. But I can tell you the only dream of the only experience of the UFO that Jung wrote about, Carl Jung, in his autobiography, Memory, Dreams, Reflections. He only mentioned the UFO once, and yet he wrote a definitive book called Flying Saucers on the UFO in 1959. he says that in a dream, he's in his garden on Lake Zurich, in Switzerland. He's in his garden and he sees two UFOs flying about. And one of the UFOs comes right next to him and it protrudes a lens. So he sees this lens coming out of a UFO and he calls it the magic lantern. He says it's a magic lantern, and he says that it's projecting C.G. Jung. He says we usually think we're projecting them, but they're projecting us. So the person he calls C.G. Jung, the identity he calls C.G. Jung, is actually being projected by this UFO. That's what he actually says.
It's like a reality projection. Like we're all. This is something which I've noticed about sort of so-called matrix, is that there's not too many moving, identifiable people in any one part of the matrix. If you see what I mean, can you follow that? The projection is limited. It's running out.
How do you mean?
Well, in the sense that that you just described, that we are some kind of projection from, so that is as if that central core that's doing the projection is running out of data space. There are fewer and fewer people around. If you look at the old photographs, there's lots and lots of people around. But if you look at any one place, apart from crowded cities, but really there aren't that many people actually walking about anymore.
Really?
No, if you look at it relative to the old pictures, if you look at any one frame, projection in terms of a projection, following on from what you've just said, there's not too many people in any one frame.
Really? Right.
If you look at football stadiums and things like that, there can be repeat sections. It's as if they concentrate all the memory for one large section of a football or rock concert or something like that. But there are not too many people walking about the streets. It's only maybe in any one frame, there's only about 12.
I see.
In any one particular frame of an individual person's reference, it's as if what you're talking about is running out. I mean, you're mixing a lot of stuff here with hints of the Montauk Project and New York Island, Brookhaven, those kind of labs that you and your sister were chosen, put into a family, and then essentially once you've been grown up, you were left to fend for yourself. What program do you think you're involved with?
Well, if you look at it from a spiritual point of view, which would be the collective unconscious in Jungian terms of psychoid, then that would be the archetypal realm. And that would be the Platonic forms. So in the sense that in your consciousness, in human consciousness, language, literature, numbers, images, you can't know the archetype. Jung says you can't know the archetype. And so in the matrix, in Maya, in the veil of illusion, as it were, then we're simply identities like on a chessboard, and some are expendable like the pawns. And I think my sister and other people in my life, they've been kind of, they're pawns. And she literally never recovered from that. My mother never recovered, my sister never recovered from all the breakup. Now, whether I was kind of the prime mover of that, I'm not sure. But if you look at C.G. Jung as an identity, he lived a life that was trying to reveal to us the nature of the UFO, or the nature of mythology, or the nature of language. He didn't succeed. And I've written a book called Jung Avatar, a biography of Jung, a biography of his visions. And I say in the Jung Avatar that Jung actually didn't go into the diamond body. He didn't go into the white room, whatever you want to call it. But he was telling us, he was warning us. In fact, when he said that the UFO is the modern myth of the 21st century, it was definitely a warning. There was definitely a warning there that this was the end of an epoch, and he was very into the age of Aquarius. So he was definitely warning us that, like you've just said, in a way, is time running out, and are we losing grip on the very knowledge and symbols that we need to get out of the matrix? If we don't have self-knowledge, if we don't access our own potential, our genius, our creativity, if we don't wake up, then we might be in trouble. And it's up, it really is in our hands, that kind of idea. And he didn't make it. He didn't make it.
Well, talking about symbols.
Yeah.
You are surrounded by symbols, sir. These are obviously placed for a little bit more than decoration. Can you describe what you have in plain sight?
Yeah.
And I'm interested at the painting behind you. Some could think it's like a butterfly, and then a monarch program comes into mind. Maybe I'm just reading too deep into things.
Yeah, well,
but you've got explain what those beautiful sashes are.
Yeah, these I picked up. They're masonic sashes of the Phoenix Lodge in Colchester. They're probably early Victorian, 1850, and they're the Rescue Lodge. They're the Phoenix Lodge, and this is the Phoenix, and this is the Eye of Horus. So you've got the Phoenix. The Rescue is rebirth. You've got the rebirth, and then when you're reborn, the one, Thoth, the one gives you the eye of Horus, the third eye. He gives you that. And so that's the same thing. That's the eye and the phoenix. So I picked these up in a shop, in a little jewelry shop, and that was called PK. And of course I said to the owner, do you know what PK is? And he said no. And I said, well, that means telekinesis. PK is moving objects at a distance. No, anyway, it came from PK.
But
and the picture,
is that not a Masonic lodge as well? A PK lodge, something?
Really? I'm not sure.
I don't know. Okay.
But the picture behind me is my own picture. I did around 1995, and it's really just a figure falling. It's a figure falling, and the head is in the bottom, and it's falling from the sky or falling into the pit or the abyss. It's a figure falling anyway. But that's...
Okay, those simple... Why are you interested in Masonic regalia?
I'm interested in connecting... See, when I go somewhere, for example, I was in Lancaster. Before I came here, I was living with my friend who was doing a PhD in Lancaster University in the religious department in Jung and Synchronicity. He's now a world famous professor of Jung and Synchronicity, and he got a post in Colchester at the University of Essex, where he's now a professor. And I said to him when we were in Lancaster, this was about 97, I said, I think the next step for me would be to go somewhere, to go into a house, and in that house would be a person, and that person would have in their front room things in the front room that tell me about myself. They tell me about myself. I just said this to him one day, that I'd enter a house, there'd be a man, and there would be things in the house that would refer to me. So we moved down here, he becomes a lecturer, and within about 9 months, I'm standing by the river. I take a walk by the river. I'm looking at the various damselflies and various insects around the river, and this black dog comes over to me, followed by an old man, and he said to me, oh, don't worry about the dog. And I got chatting with him, and I met him the next day by the lake, and I said to him, do you know the name of the pair of birds in the middle of the lake? And he looked, he said, no, but this man will know, this man coming along. And another old man, so this man's about 88 and this other man's 82, comes along. And as soon as I looked into his eyes, I knew something was going on. He just looked at me and with a twinkle in his eye, and I knew something. And he had a little black poodle with him, a little black poodle. I don't know if you've read Faust. Have you read Goethe's Faust?
I haven't read it, but I did play Dr. Faustus. I don't know if there's any connection. I played the Pope and Dr. Faustus in the same play, which probably is symbolic in some way.
So anyway, in Faust is in his study. He's a philosopher. He's a scholar. He's a philosopher in his study, and he's at the end of his tether. He's just sick of philosophy. Nothing works. He can't understand the universe. He can't understand his life. Nothing. And then suddenly a black poodle comes into the room. And the black poodle is Mephistopheles. So the devil comes into the room in the form of the black poodle. So this man comes up to me. I look in his eyes, and there's this twinkle in his eyes. It looks very black in his eyes, very emotional. And he's with a black poodle. And he says, yes, those two birds are the goosanders. They're a pair of goosanders. They're winter visitors. It was in the middle of the winter. He says the winter visitors. The next day I meet him by the lake. I just saw him. And he told me that he writes stories. He writes little stories. And he told me this story where he goes up in a plane. He goes to the moon. He leaves the moon and goes to the planets, and he's about to leave the solar system when Iris, the goddess of the rainbow, the Greek goddess of the rainbow, says, you better turn back, you're not allowed up here. He says, can I use your rainbow as a slide to slip back into my bed? So he gets on the rainbow and uses it as a slide to go back into his bed, right? So I think, well, at that time, I didn't know a lot about mythology. And I thought, when I go home, I'm going to look up Iris. I'm going to see what Iris means. So I go home and I look up in Serlo's Dictionary of Symbols, most famous book, Serlo's Dictionary of Symbols. And I find Iris, and I'm reading about Iris, and Radio 3 is playing some classical music. And suddenly the news comes on as I'm reading about Iris, and it said that the most, the famous Oxford philosopher and novelist Iris Murdoch has just died. I lived in Oxford with my friend, almost next door to Iris Murdoch, and I used to see her in North Oxford in Summertown. When I was living in the Institute for Psychophysical Research set up by Celia Green, who coined the term lucid dream. She coined the term lucid dream and brought out a book, and she was famous for studying out of the body and all of that. I lived there for a year in 1989.
Any connection with Dr. Green? I think the one of the programmers in one of the Nazi programs.
I don't know.
No.
I don't know.
So you've left out a bit of a gap, but you were on your way to India when you met Eric Clapton, and we talked about that.
So I
continue.
Yeah, so I go across land, I hitch rides, I go on a train, I go on a boat, I go all the way to India. It takes about 3 weeks. And I decide to go and find Lama Govinda. So I go into the Himalayas near Tibet, and I find his house, and I live next door. I move in next door. And
I'm terribly sorry, but for the person who don't know who these individuals are, can you describe who Lama Govinda is, right, and why him? Why that person?
Well, because I read his book, Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism. I read his book, and everybody was going to India. You know, I was part of the hippie trail and all of that. And this was 1970. This was the spring of 1970. So I lived next door to him. I go to some talks. He gives some talks to maybe half a dozen people. And the foothills of the Himalayas near Tibet, they're like ridges. They're like kind of ridges. And there's a path along the ridge. And that was known as Crank's Ridge, because Timothy Leary Ramdas, very strange American people, used to go there, so they called it Crank's Ridge. And the house that he lived in, Lama Govinda, he was a friend of the Dalai Lama, and when the Dalai Lama came out of India, he came with him. And Lama Govinda was originally German. He was originally German.
Right.
And so the house that he lived in was lived in before by Evans Wentz. Evans Wentz, he was an American scholar at Jesus College, Oxford, which is next door to my friend's college, Exeter College. My friend was at Exeter College, Professor Main, Roderick Main. He was doing classics at Oxford when I met him. So you've got Evans Wentz, and he was the first one. He was the first one to bring out what I would consider the secret doctrine. You know, Blavatsky wrote a book called The Secret Doctrine, Isis Unveiled, but they were only fragments of the teaching. But this man, Evans Wentz, he brought out the secret doctrine in 4 books. There were 4 books published by Oxford University Press. And one of the books was the Book of the Dead, which is referred to Leary, Ramdas. They all studied the Book of the Dead. And Lama Govinda did a foreword for the Book of the Dead, and C.G. Jung did psychological commentaries for that Book of the Dead. So you've got C.G. Jung linking in there as well.
What, in essence, does the Book of the Dead represent? What is the key to for people who haven't been able to see that book or read it? What is it? What does it really mean?
Well, when you die, it's a preparation for death. So if you're literally dying, the priest will read the book. If you're an initiate, a yogi, and you're going to go into the other world, into the other dimensions, then there's certain preparations you need. And you have to, there are 3 bodies, the Trikaya, they're the 3 bodies. So Buddha had 3 bodies, as it were. He had the incarnate body, so he's walking around the earth in his incarnate body. He had his visionary body, that he had his teachings, he taught symbols, etc., esoteric symbols to his disciples from the visionary body. And then you have the transcendental body, which is the highest body, the diamond body. So when you're going to die or enter the other world, the other dimensions, that's called the bardo to dol, the bardo. So you enter the bardo, and the first thing you have to remember is, don't worry about anything you see but the white light. You mustn't bother with any other lights, any colors, anything. Just focus on the white light. And that will take you into nirvana, into the diamond body, into the clear light of the one mind. If you don't make that, you go into the visionary body, which is the Sambhogakaya, which is the body of perfect endowment. So you go into the visionary realm. You know the Bodhi Maitreya, the Bodhisattva Maitreya, and so forth and so on. So you go into the visionary realm. If you don't make it to the visionary realm, then you're drawn back into your body. You're reborn into the earth. So that's what the Book of the Dead is all about, is preparing you for the afterlife.
What do those concepts involve? Does this involve, this is something that you have left your body and you move on to these other areas?
Yeah, yeah. It's an out of the body. You can do it while you're living. You don't have to die. I mean, the yogis and various people, you leave your body and you learn to identify the three bodies. So you've left your incarnate body, as it were. You're heading for nirvana, but very few make it to nirvana. Maybe the Buddha's the only one that actually made it. And if you don't make it to that, you go into what's called the five orders of dhyani. It's the celestial mandala. So you've got the five orders that make up the celestial mandala. So you've got the four cardinal points, and you've got the central Buddha. So you've got five Buddhas of meditation. They're all in meditation, and they're the attributes of the Godhead. And the Buddha's statue of Buddha is in the center, and you become identified with the various the Buddhas. So one of the Buddhas is mirror-like wisdom. So you gain the power of mirror-like wisdom, or all discriminating wisdom, and I think that's where Jung was. That's where I think Jung is. I think Jung might be there. Jung is probably there.
Okay, so that's the Book of the Dead.
Yeah.
What happened when you got to India? How did you get on?
Well, I stayed a few months near Lama Govinda, and I left Lama Govinda and travelled about, and I entered a state of mind called the void. I seemed to enter this state of mind called the void, and that is a form of nirvana, but it has negative connotations. It's quite terrible. And what happens is that your identity, we're talking about identity, and I've never felt that I've had a very strong identity. So I slipped into the void, and your sense of identity, David Curtis, living in Oxford, England, that had no meaning. That form of identification, like C.G. Jung, the psychiatrist in Zurich, he was saying that's a projection. And when you see through the veil of illusion, then in a sense your identity, your conditioning loses its significance, because you're moving into a completely different dimension. You're moving into a different dimension. And so you're detaching, as they say, you're detaching from your conditioning. So I was in the void for quite a while. It's quite terrible. I come back to England, and it turns into something very positive. It turns into a kind of ecstasy. So I was in a kind of ecstasy, and I was very silent. I didn't want to talk to people. And I ended up going into a monastery, a silent order, a monastery, an Anglican monastery. I stayed there for a few months, and I came out, and I got involved with Krishnamurti.
In Manchester. Now, and then you joined the Society of Psychical Research.
Yeah, I was involved in the Society of Psychical Research in the 70s. So I come back from India, I meet Krishnamurti, I meet Professor David Bowen, who was at Birkbeck College, London. He was an American, and he knew Oppenheimer in Berkeley. He knew Oppenheimer at the California Tech.
Was that Bowen or Owen?
Bowen, B-O-H-M, David Bowen. He wrote a book called The Wholeness and the Implicate Order. And I met him, had conversation, and met Krishnamurti, had very unusual experiences with Krishnamurti to do with his states of mind, and I was sharing his states of mind. I had access to that kind of thing, kind of spiritual states.
Could you go into that in more detail when you said you shared that state of mind? Did you actually share minds? Do you sort of?
Every year from about 1971 to 1985, he died in 86 at 91 years of age, and he was he was brought from India by the Theosophical Society by a man called Ledbetter and a lady called Annie Besson. So they brought him in. He was born in 1895. So in 1910, he was brought to London, to Wimbledon, and he was groomed. He was groomed to be the Maitreya, the Bodhisattva for Maitreya. And so anyway,
Now,
he was...
something's very important about, is it Maitreya or Maitreya? Am I saying it wrong?
No, Maitreya, I think Maitreya.
James Casbolt's been writing to me from prison, talking about the return of the Maitreya or Maitreya. So this seems... Do you want to elucidate on that? Do you want to expand?
I've in my Jung avatar, I suggest that Jung might be the Maitreya. I've suggested that Jung would be a god. He would be a god, and he would be identified with a Buddha, a god and a Buddha, and he might be the Buddha Maitreya. Now, in Tibetan Buddhism, the Buddha Maitreya is called the coming Buddha for the new age, and that's why they selected Krishnamurti to be the Maitreya. And Maitreya means love. So the Maitreya is the incarnation of love. That's what Maitreya actually means. And so in the age of Aquarius, at the end of the epoch, Jung talks about the UFO phenomenon. In this era right now, we're in desperate need of love. Let's put it, it's like we're in desperate need of love. And so the Tibetan Buddhists, maybe their prophetic, tradition, saw ahead, saw the future, and that at this time in our history, this time in our evolution, we'll desperately need the principle of love. So that's the idea.
Well, as the Beatles says, all you need is love. And I'm really keen to see. I mean, at that time, I think around about that time, the Radio Caroline was on, loving awareness, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But is this the coming of some kind of God, or some kind of wise sage within humanity, which was? I hear Casbolt was saying that being is living in London now.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah,
right.
It's interesting that yesterday, a couple of days ago, I had a Dutch woman who had been involved with Sekhmet, the
lioness. Yeah, she's the lion. I can tell you a lot about her, because she's a form of Isis.
Well, explain, because this is fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it's a very deep. This is my own investigations. It's in my books.
Okay, you've talked about your books. Name the books so people can get them from Amazon or whatever.
Yeah, you can get my 9 books from Amazon, and there's a trilogy called The Luminary is Coming, which I received that message in a dream, what Jung calls a big dream. I received the message that the luminary is coming. So I call my book trilogy, which I wrote right here in Colchester. They're the three books. Then I have a book called The One Mind, which is 3 months of Satori while I was here in Colchester. I entered the state of Satori for 3 months, and I documented that every day. I wrote a journal every day and documented the kind of things that I was seeing in the world in that state of mind. And the other books really are, they're a deep study of mythology and symbols and everything. So I'd like to take you back to ancient Egypt. And I'm not going to get into a dispute about what is the pyramids of Giza and whether they were built in 10,500 years ago. I'm just sticking to what the Egyptologists say. I just stick to the authentic text. So I only study I don't study Crowley, the occult text. I just study the authentic text. So the Egyptian period begins, the dynastic period begins in 3100. in the Old Kingdom, the third dynasty, the Old Kingdom, what you might call the Buddha or the Christ of the Egyptian period is born. So this figure is called Imhotep, I am Hetep, which means one who comes in peace. So he is alleged, he's the son of King Zoser, and he's the architect who builds the first pyramid. It's called the Step Pyramid. And that's in Saqqara, near Memphis, which was the old capital. So in Saqqara, a truncated pyramid with 6 steps was built by Imhotep, and the Wallace Budge, the person that looked after the Egyptian collection in the British Museum, said that Imhotep was the genius. He was like the genius, a bit like Akhenaten. He was like a genius, and he transformed everything. So he built this pyramid for his father, and it has 6 steps, which are the 6 planets. So you have the first step is the Earth, which is the square or the cube. Then you have the 5 planets. So you have Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Mercury. And then you have a truncated top. And then on that platform, the sunboat of Ra descends from the heavens and lands on top of the truncated step pyramid. So it lands, this starship, this sunboat, lands on the top of the step pyramid, the truncated step pyramid, and then you step aboard. When you step aboard, you step onto the 7th step, and that 7th step takes you to the 7th heaven. So you become a star, you become Horus, you become the solar deity, and you're transported to the solar dimension, which is a star. And because the step pyramid, the base of the step pyramid are the 4 cardinal points, and below the step pyramid, under the ground, are the subterranean chambers. In the step pyramid, there's all these subterranean chambers, labyrinth, and nobody knows quite what they're meant to be, but that's where the mummy chamber is, and that's called the god Zeb. So the god Zeb or Geb is the god of the earth below the step pyramid, and you can think of him as a cube. So you think of a cube as the earth, and then you've got the triangle. The pyramid itself is a cone. So you've got a triangle, which is the element fire. So you have the cube, which is the god Geb, and his son, Osiris, is in the mummy chamber. So you've got Osiris and Geb. Then you have Nuit, the sky goddess, and the triangle is her womb. It's called the Isle of Fire, and the element fire is the triangle. That's the womb of Isis. So you have, and they're the parents. Geb and Nuit are the parents of Osiris and Isis. In the fire is the phoenix. So the phoenix is born of the fire, the baptism of fire. And what happens is the solar element, the circle, the sun, ascends and comes out of the mouth of the pyramid where it's truncated, and you see it in the boat. So the starship has come down with Thoth, the one has brought the sun boat down, and you see the circle. And inside the solar circle that comes out of the mouth of the truncated, the triangle is the Isle of Fire is the womb. So that's the womb. That's the womb, and it's a cone. And then you've got the circle, the sun in the boat with a fetus inside of it. So inside is Horus, the fetus, and he's destined to become a star, become Ra. And he's also going to incarnate as the king. So you have the sphere, the cone, and the cube. So that the sphere, the cone and the cube is the body of Osiris. So you've got the head, you've got the heart, the triangle, the fire, the love element. Then you've got the lower sexual and the earth and the legs. So that's the cube, you've got the cone, and you've got the circle. And Osiris is referred to in his name of pyramid. So he is actually the pyramid. So the pyramid is actually the body, the statue or the figure of Osiris. And the four cardinal points at the base of the pyramid, they're the four cardinal points. The pyramid itself is aligned to the pole star Draco. At that time, it's the pole star Draco, which is the seat of Osiris. So when the sunbow is going to the seventh heaven and eventually to the stars, it goes via the pole star, because the pole star is that when you're traveling by sea, you use the pole star as an orientation. So when the boat goes to the heavens, it goes via Draco, the dragon, the pole star, and then it's carried along the Milky Way. The sunboat goes along the Milky Way, and then you become a star, like you become Orion you become Osiris in Orion, you become Isis in Sirius, you become Horus in Sirius, or you become one of the zodiac. You know, you go to your island constellation, you go to your destination. One of the constellations is your destination, and each constellation has its own starship. So each constellation in the Book of the Dead, you have your own starship, and you travel via the Milky Way, which is the celestial Nile River. So they see the Milky Way as actually the Nile River. And when you go to the stars, that's called the 8th level. So you've got the 7th level, which is the sun. Then you go to the 8th level. And when you go beyond the stars, you go to the 9th level, which is the company of 9, the Ennead of Heliopolis. You join the company of gods in the 9. And that's still within the cosmos. But when you go out of the cosmos, you become the one, Thoth. You become the one. So you have one, which is absolute, outside of the cosmos. Then you have the 9, which is invisible, it's invisible. Then you have the visible stars, which is the 8th, the infinity sign. Then you have the 7th, and then you're back in the step pyramid.
That is a tremendous journey.
Yeah.
And so you've been following this for spiritual reasons, or it's part of your programming? I mean, what brought you to do this? Why? I mean, this is a new origin of the word super soldier. I mean, is this would you connect with anything like that, like an enhanced state of mind? Plus the fact that, no, I don't want to go into the secret alien bases in Oxfordshire yet, but it's in the book Ireland, Land of the Pharaohs. Andrew Power makes a reference to the similar kind of journey. The Battle of the Boyne, he is saying, was not a battle; it was a ritual. In the same way that the Nile is like the Milky Way, so is the River Boyne.
Right.
And a pale horse, the William of Orange went over with a pale horse. So this that connects Ireland with Egypt. In that respect, there's an awful lot of connection there. Yeah. But where is your journey taking you, and is your journey still on your journey?
Well, so around 2000, I move into this house on my own. My friend gets married, and I move in here. I've been here since 2000. And in 2002, I start, for the first time in my life, I start writing about my life, right? So I document my life symbolically. I have a life review. I review every single detail of my life, and I symbolize.
Is that published?
Yes, in the luminary is coming.
Okay.
So I document every single symbol I can find in my life. I mean book, tree, flower, person, where I was, everything. The microcosm, I study everything, right? And I collected a library, so I have all of Jung's work, and I have my own library here. And I don't use the internet. I did all my research from 2002 to 2014. And I type everything out. I do all the book covers. I do everything, and I publish on Creative Space Amazon. So it's published, independent publisher, Creative Space Amazon. That was in March. On my birthday, I published all my books, 9 books, and of course the 9 is the Ennead. The 9 is the Ennead.
Yeah, but there's also the Society of the 9. Is there a connection there?
I don't know about the
9. Okay, fine.
So if I'm part of the one, through Satori, through the White Room, through the Diamond Body, and if I'm part of the one, then I finish my work as the 9. I finish that. So I'm kind of going out of the cosmos, you might say, out of consciousness. So I get my books published. I said, well, that's it on my birthday. That's it. I'm going to send out proposals. So I tried to contact you, Project Camelot, and lots of other people. And Project Camelot responded, and Gnostic Radio, etc. And I finally contact you. I tried to contact you before, but I finally contact you because I want to know what you know. I don't know anything about conspiracy theory. I've only been aware of it through YouTube for about a year. So I've watched a lot of your videos, lots of Project Camelot. So I'm very aware, but I know nothing about my own relationship to that. And that's why you're the first one where I feel I can somehow get a feeling for it, that I want to have a look.
Well, it seems that you're hovering around alien bases, reptilians, and Nephilim. And Valon, the Valon.
I don't know the Valon. No.
Valon is collective name for Anunnaki, Nephilim, and the other lot. But crucially, we're at a period of time. I mean, the places that you've been at are very close to underground alien bases. I think off camera before we started, you talked about alien bases where you are. I mean, Oxford, Foley, that area, straight out of Barry King's original material on underground alien bases, making controlled human beings with reptilians and people like that.
Yeah, well, I've had a reptilian. In fact, only 2 nights ago, I had my second reptilian. And I'm sure it's related to you.
Well, I'm sorry. It's yours. You've only had your second. Oh, my God. I'm just so... well, I'll have to tell Joanne about this. Don't say that, Miles. Explain that. I'm putting joviality into this deliberately.
I'm in contact with Joanne Somerville. Right.
Joanne, I think you said...
I've Skyped with her, just personal Skype with her.
She's a great lady. Joanna Summers, I think, nowadays.
She's into Blavatsky, and she said she's living in Hastings on the road where Crowley lived. She's living in the road where Crowley lived.
Well, that's very interesting because one of the key researchers in bases was a guy called Ron Adams, and he lived in Crowley Cottage and did a lot of study on that as well.
So I want to tell you now, I've given you a 4-year-old possible abduction. I've given you the Pease Air Force Base, the White Room. I want to give you my first... Do you want me to do it now in this interview? Tell you my first UFO experience, which is quite wild.
Okay, well, I think this is a good point. Just have a brief pause. I think we've been running about an hour and a half on this, which is, I think it gives it a good little pause point. So we'll have a brief pause for coffee or holy water or something, and come back with a part 2, and we'll talk about the meat of what I think you want to get involved with now. Okay, so we'll have a brief pause and come back in part 2.
Okay.